Welcome everybody to the Conscious Grief series. Today I am sitting with Trish Whelan, who is a multi-dimensional healer. Trish and I met last year in Ibiza, and I was grieving a relationship, in fact, when I came to doing one of your retreats. And I guess I just read your post the other day about you are in transition in your own life. And it had come to me before I read your recent update that I thought, oh, I'd really love to speak to Trish about grief and how it's come up in your life and how it continues to manifest in different ways. So welcome, Trish. Thank you for being here.
Hello, my darling. Thank you for inviting me. I just, like I said in response to your invitation, I just feel like this is really, really, really important work and a really wonderful offering because, yeah, especially I feel like people struggle so much to grieve, you know, over on this side of the world. So, or on the side of the world where you are. So thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And yes, Trish is in Guatemala right now. So that's the beautiful background behind her.
There's a volcano on my shoulder. And there's a volcano on the other shoulder. I'm in between two volcanoes. So.
Oh, wow. So Trish, tell me, because I know you do lots of retreats, and you were saying this past summer, for example, there was just a lot of grief. And what do you see? Yeah, what are you seeing in the people that are coming to you?
Well, I just feel like everybody in the world, everybody alive is grieving at the moment. We're grieving the loss of the old world, it feels like to me, and the loss of old ways and the loss of, you know, ways that people had been living for their lives, really. So yeah, I've been really observing people in deep grief, in much deeper grief stories this last season just gone by than any previous, actually. You know, the collective grief is heavy.
It is. And I know that one of the reasons that you sort of found yourself in Ibiza 8 years ago, you said was after the passing of your mother. Is that right?
Yeah, so I lost my mum on New Year's Eve in 2012. And I'd actually lost my nana in March 2001. And after the loss of my nana, I was living in London. I lived in London for 25 years. And after I lost my nana, I just, how tricky it was to really mourn her in London, and how much I have observed, particularly English people, struggle with grief. Whereas in Ireland, there's just much more of a natural way around mourning and grieving. And so when I lost my mum, with the information of what had happened when I lost my nana, I just, as I was holding my mum's hands in her dying days, I just decided absolutely need to get out of London to really be able to grieve. So I decided to go to Ibiza for 6 months. I actually ended up staying 8 years, but yeah, I just really felt like I needed to be somewhere where the land could really hold me, and where, you know, there wasn't that kind of stigma around the grieving, because you know, I was really in the depths of grief. My mum was only 64, and you know, it was so tragic. So I just wanted to go and cry down my tears into Ibiza, really, and be held. So that's what initially, that was the driver for going there. And then I was really just recovering from grieving for my mom, and when I tragically lost my dad. So it was an interesting kind of holding for me by Ibiza, because my dad died in 2016. So in the time from losing my mum to losing my dad and I had made some really wonderful memories in Ibiza. So that was, it was a different kind of grieving that happened. But yeah, Ibiza, I feel like now I've closed this 8-year chapter. I feel like so much of it was led by grieving, actually, yeah.
Would you mind sharing some more about your parents, them as people, your relationship with them and how they died?
Yeah, my relationship was wonderful in latter years. I mean, I was a bit of a nightmare teenager. I was a bit of a rebel to any cause, and I left home at 18. In 1988, I moved to London, and yeah, I felt, misunderstood and all of those things. That angst, I guess. But then in later years, when I started, I started really on my spiritual journey in 2002, and that was something that really brought me closer to my mum and dad. They really loved, they really felt the healing, and that was a really beautiful thing. And so yeah, in the latter years, we had such a strong bond, the three of us, and then the two of us. And my mum used to say things to me like, when I was doing my shamanic training, for example, my mum would say things to me like, "Are you a Buddhist now, Trish?" And I'd say, "No, Mum, I'm not a Buddhist." And she'd say, "What are you? What are you, though? I mean, what are you really?" And I'd say, "I'm really your daughter, So, yeah, we had my mum was very, very, very kind, and wasn't really a natural parent, I would say. And they were very young when I was born. They were only 21. But she definitely grew into that. And yeah, she was lovely. She was a lovely person, a really, really good. She was a good, so kind. I think that was the thing that really stood out from what everybody said about her at her wake, how kind she was. And she was a real lady. And my dad and I were I'm the image of him. It's really, literally like a photocopy of him, physically, my face, everything. And I was really, a real little daddy's girl. I was a real little pet. And yeah, he and I just, we were a real little team, actually. And it was a wonderful thing that we were able to make those beautiful memories in Ibiza after losing Mummy. And when I went the first time he came to visit me, we made a pilgrimage together and went to all of the churches, of which there are many in Ibiza, and lit a candle in each one for my mum. And I would say that, they didn't have the kind of ideal dream relationship, I guess, because they were so young also, and they were really kind of learning on their feet. But in later years of life, you know, they really were, they were really kind to each other. And he was 67. He just went to bed and never woke up again, actually. So there was a different kind of grief involved with that, because my mum had a stroke. She'd had a stroke 2 years before, and then she had another stroke. And she was actually unconscious for 8 days in a coma. So there was some sort of timeline around being able to come to terms with losing her, and that space, you know, that very delicate space when somebody is passing, that privilege of being there with them and, you know, wiping their, you know, mopping her brow and holding her hand and, you know, comforting her. And I was able to stay with her every night and give her healing and play her songs. And that was a really beautiful space to have the privilege of being in with her. So then, you know, the shock of, you know, not being able to get in touch with my dad, the kind of worry for those 24 hours of not being able to reach him, and then the shock of losing him like that. I mean, obviously for him, he just went to bed and he never woke up again. So, you know, I guess, is that the dream? Who is, you know, I guess we would think that that's probably the dream way to die. So the shock and the grief for them both was so very different, actually. You know, I think with the stroke, you know, you see so many people. My nana also died of a stroke, and you see so many people in, you know, in hospitals who have strokes and then who are just left, you know, taken in and out of bed every day. And my mum used to have a saying that was, you know, she used to say, there's worse things than dying. And so having had a stroke, and she had a stroke in 2010, and they said, oh, looks like she's going to, you know, not recover. Basically, she was in ICU. And then it was like, well, she looks like she might recover, but she is not going to be able to walk or talk. And then she, I mean, in the end, those last 2 years of her life, actually, in fact, were so potent and powerful, because not only did she walk and talk, she was driving, she was swimming, she was painting, she discovered painting. So we managed to get her into the National Rehabilitation Centre in Ireland, and the energy that she put into her rehabilitation was just incredible, actually. And so those last 2 years were so positive for her. And when I went with her, I mean, it was a miracle kind of thing happened also, in that, you know, she'd made this miraculous recovery. And then a year and 51 weeks later, she had an epileptic fit. And apparently epileptic fits can happen up to 2 years after a stroke. So she was just 1 week off being clear of that. And that was a real setback. But because she'd had that epileptic fit, my sister had come home from New York to visit her. And because my sister had gone home with my little nephew, who was only 2 at the time, I went home then as well. And we were doing an early Christmas. My sister was leaving on the 18th, and we were doing an early Christmas dinner. And as we were preparing it, my mum had another stroke. So she had one daughter from New York and one daughter from London. On either side of her only 2 daughters. So she didn't fall, or, we were with her, miraculously. So there's just such a beautiful space, isn't there, in that, how miraculous that was, really. And so I went with her then in the ambulance to the hospital, and I really prayed that if she was going to have another experience, like another 2 years of healing like she just had, really prayed that she would be free of pain. It was so beautiful, the healing that had happened in those 2 years. And so it looked like she was going to be okay, actually. And then I went in, one Saturday morning, and I could see that she was not following me around the bed. I was walking around the bed, and she was still looking over there, and she just wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And she had a bleed in her brain. And then they said, it was going to be hours or days, but definitely not weeks. And so then she hung on for 8 days. So that really gave us a chance to, somewhat come to terms with what was happening, somewhat. Mm. So, it was, they were both really huge experiences. I guess all of the little things that happen around the loss. When I lost my dad, I had seen him in the May, and I had an Irish client. I did a retreat in Ireland, and I had an Irish client who had done a retreat with me in Ibiza, literally a couple of weeks before, actually. And she was into horse racing, and my dad was really into horse racing. And she came to the retreat in Ireland, and my dad came for lunch on the last day, on the second to last day. And they really connected over horse race. They ended up hanging out in the kitchen for like 3 hours, chatting. And she was actually with me doing her Reiki training when I lost my dad. So she knew him. So it's like, of all of the clients, wow. Of all of the clients to have with me, one of the, that was the biggest chat my dad had ever had with a client of mine. And that just felt really just divinely timed as well. Mm-hmm. So, different circumstances, different kinds of grief, really.
Hmm. Well, I want to really thank you for telling us those stories. They're really heartfelt. It's really beautiful to hear, because I haven't heard these precious stories of yours. You've been a teacher of mine, and I didn't get to know that part of you. So thank you. And it was making me think about like this gorgeous, deep, loving relationship that you have with your mother. And then, like you said, you were working in London, and it's as if no one can understand what you've just been through. And how it's so interesting, that you can speak about your culture in Ireland comparatively. So what were some of the kind of expectations or that people had of you around your grief of your mother, or did people completely dismiss it? Or do you have any memories of specific things that happened?
Well, I just remember with my nana that people, when I lost my nana, I was still working in the music business, and she had a stroke on the 10th of January 2001, and she passed over on the 18th of March. So for that time in that limbo land, she was 79. When people, I was working, I was back in Ireland, I guess, for maybe 3 weeks, and then I had to go back to work. So I went back to work, and then I was going to Ireland every weekend. And I guess people would just, say, hi, how are you? And I would say, I'm not good. My nana's dying or whatever. And then after she died, when people would say, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm not good. I've just lost my nana. People would be like, okay. So anyway, just sorry about that. There wasn't really space. They're just, people just, I don't know, almost like people are embarrassed or something really kind of weird for me. And I remember a friend of mine lost her mum. And when we were and she was in Sheffield, this was a few years later. And when we were on our way up to the funeral there was a couple of friends in the car, and one of them had just lost his dad. And he said, I must tell Karen that people will say once, sorry about your dad, and they'll never mention it again. And it just felt like that was so true. Whereas in Ireland, people, I would have seen at least 100 dead bodies before I left home, because there's the tradition around honouring the dead, and it's so, like it's so normal. So I guess I felt like, my nana was a kind of, training ground. And then after I lost my mum, I actually stayed in Ireland for about 5 weeks. And then I actually just grieved in my own process. I didn't expect it to be any other way, really, when I got back to London. So I kind of set my wheels in motion to leave there and to be somewhere where, there was space to just cry when I wanted to cry. And, I was so exhausted. It's so exhausting grieving, isn't it? The grief is just, I feel like people often don't realize how physical the experience of grief is. How tired you are when you're really grieving. Like, it's not just your spirit, it's it's every cell in your body is completely wiped out. And that's what I really, in those big grieving moments for my mum and dad, just being aware of how exhausting it was interesting.
And and I like the way that you, that you made such a self-honoring, wise choice for yourself by going to Ibiza and allowing the island to hold you, and the nature you mentioned. That the power of nature can be such a healing source for us.
I mean, it's everything, isn't it? The nature. I mean, it's, when we are in the nature, our soul is just able to, to land. And, the nature, is, it's everything, isn't it? The nature. I mean, it's when we are in the nature, our soul is just able to, to land. And, the nature, is, it's everything, isn't it? The nature. I mean, it's when we are in the nature, our soul is just able to, to land. And, the nature, is, it's everything, isn't it? The nature. I mean, it's when we are in the nature, our soul is just able to, to land. And, we're supported by the nature. Snoop.
Snoopy.
Sorry, I got. You can hear a dog barking in the background. Sorry, excuse me. Yes, being in the nature and having a little pal like this, having a little pal, just having support of, how we can be so humbled when we're out in nature, and I feel like I did a lot of grieving when I was driving.
Interesting.
I feel like a lot of tears came, driving across Ether, not particularly knowing where I was going, but just, being in the car. And the waves of grief,
Yeah. Oh, look at
the waves of grief.
Do you ever scream in the car? Do you ever use the car as a place to express anger as well as tears?
Well, usually I've got Snoop in there, so I'm not sure how well he coped with
traumatized Snoop.
No. You wouldn't like that, would you, mate? So no, but I do sing. And I guess, I do that punching thing. I do that punching Kundalini exercise, really for the anger. But no screaming. No screaming.
I'm glad that you brought up singing, because when I think of you, I think of music, and I know that was your background before you became a healer and a yoga teacher. And then the gong, for example, in the end of a Kundalini yoga class, and just sound in general, like what a powerful thing it is for healing, for connecting with our emotions. Like, just love to hear you talk a little bit about music, because I know that it's such an important part of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that just popped into my head was when I was moving to Ibiza, when I was taking off for those 6 months in Ibiza, and I had, my drums and sheepskins and, crystals in the ashtray in the car. I mean, literally, you couldn't have put another hair into that car, actually. And as I was driving over the threshold onto the ramp onto the boat, I was playing "I Will Always Love You," Dolly Parton, for my mom, and I was just really, really crying. I just feel like music can unlock. I mean, for me personally, music just unlocked so much of the grief, actually. So yeah, songs, and then just where we can get to with the sound, like what can happen in that space of lying down and just allowing the sound vibrations to really run through the body and heal. And it's so, for me, it's the grieving, was very physical, but really the heart, just the healing that was coming into my heart through the sound. And actually, at the time when I lost my dad, I was a case study for a friend of mine who was doing her gong training. So I had 40 gong sessions from her. And that was just another way of the universe being so clever, I guess, just how we become aligned to what our soul needs for healing in that time. You know, like what, for me, really, what the grief can unlock. You know, music is the key that opens the door, you know, that really lets the grief pour out. So yeah, always I always go back to the music. And you know, now, you know, a song will just, you know, a song will open me to tears faster than anything else. And also in those moments of really needing healing, you know, the sound is just so potent, where it can go into the spaces that, you know, nothing else can in many respects, you know. So yeah, really, you know, what the sound can just penetrate through the heart so powerfully.
Yeah, I love how you put that. Sound is the key to unlocking the heart. That's so powerful, because so often in grief we want to protect our hearts, and we think that by doing that we want to close our hearts. And I'm always encouraging people to keep your heart open, because we want to stay in the connection, stay in the flow of love going through us, because a life without that is not a life fully lived.
There's a really beautiful expression that somebody, well, my best friend Jade used to say to me when I'd ring her up, you know, really bawling my eyes out. She'd just say, you know, grief is gold. And grief really is gold, because there's nothing really else that can take you to the depths of this human experience as much as grief. You know, just, and also, you know, how precious life is.
Right.
You know, how precious life is. And we realize how precious life is the most when we are in close contact with death. And, you know, that's going to happen to us all. Sooner or later.
Yeah.
So there's a real life affirming gift in the gold that is the grief.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of that term about grief being love. You know, if our hearts are opening and we're feeling and we're grieving, then we're also connected to that part of ourselves, which is our hearts, which is love.
Yeah, really. Really. Yeah.
Trish, would you share more about your shamanic practice and how that works and how it can help?
Well, I practice shamanism as a spiritual practice, and you know, shamanism really is honoring the vibration of everything, that everything is living and everything has a vibration, and you know, honoring the cycles of life, the cycles of the sun every day, the rising and the falling of the sun, the cycles of the moon every 28 days, you know, the connection to the stars. You know, I work with this reality we would call the middle world, and then the upper world is above us, where our soul guides are, and then the lower world where our power animals are, and yeah, I was an apprentice that trained with a shaman in the Highlands called Two Birds, and really the shamanic healing practice is really calling all of the soul parts back. So, we have experiences in life, big experiences, for example, grief, where in order to manage the certain experiences in life, our soul has to leave the body to cope. Mm-hmm. And so shamanic healing is really about bringing the soul parts back. But it's, honoring the earth, honoring nature, walking in beauty, walking lightly on the planet, living kindly and caring and living naturally, living in love, and honoring the ancestors and where we came from, and all of the ancestors that came before us to make us who we are, and all our relations, honoring the traditions, working with all of the energy that we have, that we've been given, wherever we are. So it makes the most sense to me, actually, to that, the earth is the altar.
Right. Yeah.
The earth is the altar.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The earth is altar. Actually, you said, I did one of the first sort of retreats I did was in Ibiza, and it's called A Walk in Beauty. And we did some shamanic practices, and I mean, at the time I was like sort of so stressed out and in fashion, and I really didn't have a clue what I'd signed up for. I didn't ask any questions. I thought it was a yoga retreat. We literally did 1 hour of yoga in 3 days. It was like so far out for me back then. But I remember we were all sort of sitting around a fire singing songs, and we were singing Pachamama, and I was like, oh my gosh, this really makes sense for me, because my whole life we've been talking about God as a male figure, which was triggering to me, to be honest. And so, yeah, Pachamama really, really touched me. And I don't know so much about actually shamanic work, and I'm intrigued to understand and learn more. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the magic of the shamanism, that was the experience for you, that, it just, you get to it, we get what we need when we need it. So that was obviously what you needed at that time.
Yeah, it was very powerful 3 days that was. And I think it must be so interesting for you, because you get people reaching out to you all the time and signing up to your retreats. And there must be some people that ask you like a million questions about what is it? What am I going to expect? All the questions. I mean, I'm the complete opposite. Like I just, sign up and don't ask any questions. But I think what I kind of wanting to say to people who are listening to this, and this is a whole weird world that we're talking about, but you feel like you'd love to go to a retreat somewhere away from home, and you feel like you need healing, and just go for it, because it's like can really be such a powerful thing and can change your life. And being with someone like Trish on retreat, where you're going to be so held and so loved and supported. And yeah, tell us a little bit more about your retreats. I know that you are in a transition right now with your work, but
well, I'll be back in real life retreats, very soon again. The thing I feel like with the retreats really is actually people don't ask that many questions. In fact, there's a real calling of the soul for people to arrive there. And this kind of feeling that when people kind of, people just act on the feeling more than anything else, more than the questions and answers, actually. So my retreats are, I kind of have an issue with that word transformation, but they are really transformational. And it's interesting with the grief. I work with a lot of people with grief. And often, in the sharing, it's so interesting that the groups that come together, there's always, it very rarely happens that one person is just feeling one thing. So I'll often have a few people who are grieving. The retreats are really a very safe space to really meet yourself. So people get, I think, things happen and they bring up big questions. And coming on retreat allows people the opportunity to create a space where they can meet themselves. So it's shamanic Kundalini yoga, healing, sharing, lots of fabulous therapists. I have different programs, 7-day or 5-day. Sorry. So I have different programs, and they're all pretty amazing, actually. I mean, people really heal. People really heal. People soften. There's a softening that happens. There's a lovely connection. There's a really nice vibe, yoga sound. Sorry, excuse me. So I hadn't anticipated all of that beeping noise to be happening. They're really great, my retreats. They it's just an honor to facilitate, healing on such a deep level for people, and the alignment of the yoga with the healing, and the food is amazing, and they're always in epic locations. And also, more recently working more online again now for the winter. And that's also a wonderful experience that I never really thought I'd be so into. But it's just so wonderful, particularly being live online and working with people in their own homes where, the healing is just happening, for them. The healing's just happening on a daily basis. So I'm excited. I've got a 7-week program coming up in January. I like being in that space. I never thought I'd say that.
What date does it begin in January?
It starts on the 9th.
On the 9th, okay. We'll because this will be aired a little bit after that, but it would be a nice thing to be able to tell people about.
I have like a nice 40-day program online also. I mean, I feel like it's really nice to be able to open up the retreat experience and make it more accessible for more people. So the 40-day program is like a 40-day retreat that people do at home. That's very healing. I mean, I'm really just interested in all of these modalities in terms of the healing that they can affect, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness, Trish, we have gone over time because it is like just so wonderful hearing your voice and hearing everything you have to say and share. But I think that the offering, like you say, is so great that people can do that 40-day retreat starting whenever they want. And
yes, exactly.
And that we will make sure we put a link to your website on the bottom of this.
Thank you.
And check everything out that you offer. So anything before we wrap up? I don't want to cut you off, sorry.
Well, I feel like, for me, the main message really to anybody who's grieving is, this too shall pass, but really, to really step into it as deeply and as fully as you possibly can, because it's a huge, massive, enormous, if not the biggest opportunity and doorway to healing for us all in this lifetime.
Yeah.
Really allowing the grief to affect change and healing.
Mm-hmm. Very, very wise words. Thank you, Trish. Thank you.
Loads of love.
See you. Mwah. Lots and lots of love to you.
Lots of love.
Guatemala.